Hello and welcome to Avasant's Digital Forum, Enabling Digital Innovation in Healthcare, Leveraging Platforms and Hyperautomation. My name is Andriana Albert and I will be your MC today. Avasant is thrilled to bring an hour of innovative thought leadership and expert insights to our audience, so thank you again for joining us. As we aim to make these sessions as interactive as possible, we encourage you to utilize the chat and Q&A features on your dashboard to pose questions to the panelists. They will be answering them live throughout the session. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator, Srinivas Vangala. Srinivas is the former CIO of Forest Laboratories, now Allergan, and he is currently an Avasant Distinguished Fellow. Srinivas, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here and happy to moderate this session. I just thought I'd just briefly, walk through some of the observations I've had in the industry specific to, the impact of the pandemic. The provider space has undergone several challenges in the recent past, not limited to, but including, M&A activity, impact of the ACA, implementation of EMRs and their impact on, physicians' time. And the spring of, in addition to all of that, spring of 2020 brought this game-changing pandemic, with a near shutdown of non-COVID related revenue for routine patient care, elective procedures, drop in ER traffic, and shortages of everything from PPEs to ICU beds, ventilators, and the like. So as we slowly come out of the acuteness of the pandemic, some providers have used it as an opportunity to harness digital solutions such as digital front doors, telehealth, remote patient engagement and follow-up, and improving the integration with their payer systems. The pandemic also created common issues for payers, providers, lab services, life sciences, etc., such as having to rapidly provision and enable remote work for nearly 100% of their workforce. The resulting security challenges, the real-time recalibration of partner contracts to ensure continuity, the planning for a return to normal, and policies including hard HR choices to enable safe return of staff to their workspace. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm not going to read through all of these. I think you folks can take a look at them, but here are some of the key recommendations from our Avasant's radar view, specifically as it relates to payers. And I had mentioned to you some of the challenges, but here are some of the solutions that are being adopted across the value chain on the payer side. Next slide. On the payer side, there's been many changes as well. A drop in covered lives initially, driven by some layoffs, dealing with channel overload and a significant increase in customer call volumes and their triage, disruption in offshore services like claims processing, new customer processing, etc., dealing with social responsibility services like accepting delayed premium payments, waivers, changes to claims processing to expedite payments, etc. Central labs also had seen a big impact with sudden surge of COVID testing, followed by vaccine administration and other challenges as well, which impacted the providers as well. The purpose of today's roundtable is to provide a forum to those of you who are dealing with these and other issues, so you can share your experiences, lessons learned, digitization plans, hyperautomation, AI, and other innovations that you're adopting along with your peers. Next slide. So these are our panelists. We have the pleasure of having Kimberly Sullivan from Providence, healthcare system. She is the Chief Revenue Officer. We have Stephen Gerst, who's the former president and PPO of the PPO division of Columbia HCA Healthcare. We have John Walters, who is a principal and a healthcare lead in Avasant's healthcare practice. So with that, I thought I'd just jump into a few questions. So Kimberly, if you could maybe field the first one. Is your organization or your clients currently adopting telehealth? And what does your roadmap look like?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to participate today. And I'm really excited to share about what my organization is doing. For those not familiar with Providence, we're an integrated health company on the West Coast. We serve 7 states that include California, Texas, New Mexico, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and California. And so And interestingly, we had the first COVID patient in one of our Washington hospitals. So we have really exploded our telehealth business at Providence. The consumer adoption of telemedicine, of course, accelerated with COVID. We were seeing prior to that a few thousand telemedicine visits a month, and that was primarily family medicine, internal medicine, and primary care. And then thankfully we had the infrastructure in place to expand as soon as COVID hit. And we saw in 2020, 1.5 million patient encounters through our telehealth program. And then in 2021, our numbers are still increasing. We've seen 1.2 million through October. I think one of the catalysts also was Medicare and CMS made some changes to their reimbursement so that it allowed for more telehealth through waivers during COVID. And then what's exciting now is we're really expanding that business. So beyond just the one-on-one with your physicians, we have expanded into telesitters, tele-ICU, telestroke, telehospitalists, and even behavioral health. So one great outcome of the pandemic was really enabling our patients to still connect with their clinicians virtually. And, for me in revenue cycle, I think one of the greatest success stories was when you imagine those underserved and underprivileged who would have to take time off school or arrange for daycare for their children. Now they can do a telehealth visit from home or from work, and it doesn't disrupt their daily lives. So I really feel like we're serving the underserved in more ways. And I know, Steve, that you have great interest in telehealth and have been looking at it from more of a national scale. Anything to add or share?
Sure, there's lots. I mean, telehealth has been around for quite some time. The last 10 to 15 years, there are some companies that you've all heard of that have really exploded on the field, and some have gone public. Before the pandemic, it was approximately 43% of hospitals had the capabilities or had set up some sort of capability to do telehealth, but we're generally seeing very small volumes. One big university system that we know of was getting 11 calls per day. Now, suddenly with the pandemic, they were up to 11,000 calls a week. There's another major health system, CMIO, that I know of out of the Harvard system, who had moved to Mayo to become head of the platform. And he had said that when he first got there, he developed his 10-year plan in January. By the end of February, he had to implement the whole thing. It was that big a crush. And so the technology has been there for quite some time right now. But Medicare hadn't really formalized any way to pay for it. And that's been an issue. So during the pandemic, through the CARES Act and through some of the Emergency Relief Acts, Medicare guaranteed payment, that's been an issue about for adoption lately, because when the public health crisis is supposed to subside right now they're saying end of January, a lot of the changes that were made, relaxed HIPAA requirements and those sorts of things are supposed to go away. But there actually was a bill sent out yesterday. That's how timely this is. That would change all that and make a lot of the recommendations and a lot of things that have proven to work that proposed to be more permanent, and that would include Medicare payment and Medicaid payments.
My understanding,
be very big for adoption. Yeah.
So, John, my understanding is that payers are also working through the process of how they're going to start reimbursing, not just CMS. What's your experience been in that space?
Well, I think the incentives for action are varied based on the business model in place. So we all know that, the insured member can go from fully insured or partially insured, or there can be joint incentives. So I think what we're seeing is that there's sort of a convergence of suppliers and technology all working on the same objective, which is to make people healthier and avoid these big medical costs that can build up in the background.
So maybe I'll take you folks in a slightly different direction now from telehealth. What are some of the technology initiatives that Providence has initiated in addition to telehealth as a result of the pandemic?
Well, what first comes to mind to me and for Providence is we're trying to get on a single EMR. So if you know our history, we are the accumulation of different health systems that were on different platforms, be it Epic, be it Meditech, be it multiple versions of Epic. So we really think that to ease our clinicians' way, right, we would have the best in breed, which we believe is Epic, as the technology platform. And then we're also looking at solutions that interface with Epic that alleviate the clinician's time spent documenting. So one of the cool things is a project we're working on right now with Nuance. It's called the ambient experience, where you have everything that's said in the room recorded, so that rather than a physician documenting, it is recorded and transcribed, right, from voice recognition technology. So that's the number one thing that comes to mind. So in the pandemic, as we've just been talking about, I mean, clinician burnout, staff burnout have been real. And because I come from revenue cycle, everything we ask our clinicians to do to ensure that we've fully documented a case for acuity and for quality, and then also to be properly reimbursed. The list of asks just keeps increasing and increasing. And so we're looking for a more holistic way to look at medical documentation so that a physician doesn't spend all of his or her time at the computer, right? And has more time for actual patient care.
And are you also looking at some electronic front door operations to relieve the stress on your front office, if you will?
Yeah, the front door stuff is really to ease the way for our patients, right? When you have a 51 hospital health system, navigating, finding a physician, understanding which clinicians are associated with our practices. And most importantly, there are different apps. So we have an app for pregnancy. And so through the front door, we combine all of our apps so that you can have a single sign-on. You can access not just find a doctor, but you can also access your medical record through MyChart, through this front door app. So anything we can do to help our consumers navigate a very complex system.
So I can tell you, speaking from personal experience, the front door of MyChart has been such a huge advantage for things like prescriptions, refills, etc., not having to go in to see the doctor for that. But John, I thought I'd ask you a little bit about the front door, because I know you're looking at it across multiple providers. What are you seeing in terms of not just the front door operations, but some of the data analytics and AI that surrounds that, and what kind of good outcomes are coming from that?
Sure. When you think about platform assets in an insurance model or a delivery system, or even an integrated health system like Providence, you typically think of these big back-end transactional systems such as Epic was mentioned, or maybe claims processing systems. But I think the maturity is starting to really increase as it relates to platform assets that support the digital front door and the things that can go along with it. So what I think we're seeing is a new sort of platform strategy emerging. And you have companies like Microsoft who have released the healthcare cloud, You have companies like Salesforce who have also started to really look at how their assets could be utilized in a healthcare environment. And, obviously a lot of the big tech companies, Google, for example, is making a lot of investments in digital health. And then even from a system integrator perspective, there's an example, Deloitte has an offering called Converge Health, which is built on Salesforce, but then it adds in additional functionality. So I think what we're seeing is that the infrastructure and the platform building blocks are starting to fall in place. And then those are customized based on what your business model is. If you're a hospital system, you may have certain functionality, such as what's in Epic. If you're a pure insurance provider, you may have, need the claims processing capability and those types of things. And then I think what's happening in the digital front door now is that the systems are starting to communicate. So with initiatives like interoperability, we're starting to see that these systems don't sit in silos anymore in an organization. They're actually tapped and then used to develop care pathways and strategies, and even to integrate things like wearable tech into the process.
Actually, that's a really good segue. I was going to mention that just yesterday I was in a seed investing pitch from a company that has come up with a new technology to enable blood draw, essentially to replace venipuncture with a finger prick, and a device that separates the plasma on the spot, reducing any potential, damage to it and then shipping it to a lab. I was really fascinated with that, and I think that that really has some great potential. But what I wanted to ask you, Steve, is relative to that. So telehealth is essentially the patient engaging with a physician or provider system, but you have a slew of other things going on, like IoTs, remote lab information, like companies that are coming out with self-testing P strips, etc.
Right.
What are you seeing in that space?
There's a tremendous amount of development in that space, and especially medical device. And there's been over $40 billion just put in this year, 30 billion last year into digital health and new devices. One of the things, again, part of this Cures 2.0 proposal that was because they want to allow quicker breakthrough technologies to be funded and paid for by CMS if they've been approved by the FDA. That had been put on the back burner by the current administration a few weeks ago, but this is going to really spur a lot of new medical testing and development. Now, there's an evolution that's taking place, which we've all seen and are pretty familiar with. John and I have been working on this for the last 5 or 6 years together. But that is not only telehealth does the engagement with the physicians, but then remote patient monitoring adds the devices. And when you get the devices into the home, you can move to a hospital at home model. And you also can tie the hospital in their outreach and patient engagement programs directly into the home. This is going to be a tremendous change in healthcare. Healthcare has been very physician-centric for many, many years. And now we're moving to more patient-centric approach around these devices and around all the technology and AI, machine learning, predictive analytics, digital therapeutics. There's so many things that are coming out right now. As a matter of fact, one of the things is proposed for next year is not only the reimbursement schedules we have for remote patient monitoring, but remote therapeutic monitoring is being considered by CMS now, which is without devices, but with the physician engaging with the patient in the home.
So Steve, on that note, my understanding is that life sciences is also beginning to adopt some of these things, because the pandemic, they found that the patients in their clinical trials were not able to come on site. And I believe that they've been actually a little bit further ahead in employing these things, because they had to immediately make sure that they didn't lose momentum in existing or ongoing clinical trials.
That's absolutely true. The pandemic shifted the clinical research organizations, rather than pulling people into their labs or into their clinics to do testing, to utilize the technology remote patient monitoring and telemedicine to do a lot of these tests. When you add the AI components, machine learning, deep learning, and the intelligent augmentation of these systems, they can get a lot more results back. And with the supercomputers that are being used right now, you can develop drugs much faster than you could years ago. One story I was reading is that in one day, one of the pharmaceutical companies was able to do 100,000 simulations or 100 million simulations on a particular drug with all the stereochemistry and the different polymers in order to come up with what would have taken years to do on clinical testing. So it's moving very rapidly.
That's not unlike how the mRNA, vaccine was created.
Exactly.
I believe, and actually in about 3.5 weeks, once the DNA was available.
Right.
So let me come back to you, John, and ask you, the question, the buzzword, hyperautomation that's being used. Break it down for us and give us an understanding of what some of the underlying components are.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times when you think about automation, you may think of a process which involves some sort of manual intervention that is then automated, or the human factor is taken out and replaced with some decision methodology or formula. I think that where we're seeing automation really start to take hold is first of all, in the area of patient stratification. And what I mean by that is, how do you identify the patients in your system, either members or patients who could benefit the most from proactive engagement or interventions? And certainly people who may have been diagnosed with one or more chronic diseases, or who may have a maintenance scenario, which, if not, like diabetes is an example where you have to monitor closely medication. So I think one area of automation is in terms of classifying and identifying the subset of patients who could benefit the most from proactive outreach. The second area where I think automation is really starting to kick in is what types of interventions are patients most amenable to? What do they appreciate? So, for example, we saw in the earlier stages of the pandemic, when we were trying to work with clients to reach out to potential COVID patients, we sent a number of emails and things, and the response rate was quite low. But when we applied some automation to create a chatbot to drive the initial interaction with the patients, we found that the adoption rate and the receptivity to a proactive chat session was much, much higher than email. So I think what we're starting to see is automation that's developing beyond the typical efficiency types of automation and automation that can really help support the decision processes as part of the front door.
So sort of a little bit of, rather than just having a siloed project by project, trying to integrate across various technologies, be it process automation, robotic process automation, IoTs, devices, etc., and trying to bring them all together to get a good outcome for the patient.
Yeah, exactly. I think what we started to understand, and I think this was brought up before, where Steve had mentioned, we're moving from more of a physician-centric model or disease-centric model to a consumer-centric model, where patients are taking responsibility for their healthcare and their wellness, and they're getting more involved. Thus, they're able to help drive portions of their care better. And so I think you're seeing automation respond to that consumer impact. So instead of automating, back office processes, we're now looking to automate engagement and interactions with consumers.
So Kimberly, do you have any projects in this space that fit into that kind of categorization?
Yeah, absolutely, across the entire spectrum. So in revenue cycle, we still are doing RPA type projects on those really basic repeatable tasks. And I'll give you an example. Once we send a claim to the payer, we have RPA that scans the payer website to make sure that they received and acknowledged receipt of the claim. So very basic tasks. And then when you think of some of the advances we've made, we have at Providence a blockchain company. And so we've been using blockchain in a very limited way. So working with the payers and understanding what their authorization requirements are and having those on a shared ledger rather than prior, we would have people who would scan the payer manuals to see what's changed in the payer notices in terms of what's changed. So those are some really exciting components. The other, what I love is now that the medical record is completely digital, we have technology that is reading the medical record and looking for clinical hints that a diagnosis might be missing or a clarification is needed in the record. So again, rather than devoting a nurse's time to reading a chart from beginning to end, we have that type of automation in place that can not only read and digest it, but then also use ML to find information that could be missing and prompt us and prompt the physician. So really cool stuff from a revenue cycle perspective.
So pharma has been doing that quite a while, basically putting in what are called data integrity rules or automated processes to find missing data, to find inconsistent data, such as a patient was given some kind of a cardiac medication, but there isn't an actual, medical history record of cardiac issues, basically alerts, if you will. So let me shift gears a little bit and Steve, get you involved in this sort of complex question. There's been a lot of supply chain and logistics issues across every industry, and healthcare is not one that's exempt from it. And I think that initially, obviously, you had the whole issue with PPEs, ventilators, etc. But even till today, I think healthcare organizations are facing huge disruptions due to supply chain issues. What are you seeing there, and what kind of solutions do you see providers, labs, and pharmas implementing?
Well, fortunately, a lot of these issues have calmed down a little bit. I remember right at the point of the pandemic, it was nearly impossible for folks to get pulse oximeters or glucometers because so many of these things are made in China. But obviously for a hospital, there's a tremendous amount of supplies that have to be stored in inventory, pharmaceuticals, all these, the different kinds of technology that obviously needs to be available, especially around the COVID patients. And so I see a lot of these hospitals moving more towards inventory management control systems, blockchain. Things are tied in with the EMR so that you can use AI and machine learning to anticipate the needs of the hospital coming up. It's not just in time inventory anymore. Now it's a better idea to keep stock on some of these inventories of more critical needs, but be able to use predictive analytics to understand where the trends are from a demographic point of view. You also have the issues of social determinants of health and health equity to be able to know what type of cases or who's going to be coming in your door. So you can stock up in advance and anticipate those needs. So again, artificial intelligence and machine learning are creating algorithms that the hospitals are using to anticipate their needs.
So in that vein, Kimberly, there was a Harvard Business Review report that spoke about hospitals potentially having the ability today to harvest their big data to predict what the public health future or upcoming challenges might be, and as opposed to getting sort of caught with the proverbial pants down when the pandemic hit, that they're trying to predict and start to pre-order their supply chains, etc., so that they're prepared when something new comes up. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely seeing, not to that extent, but again, I'm not in the clinical realm, but what we are seeing is large health systems willing to share their data sets, and which is helping facilitate research and some of the predictability of what the next surge is going to be with COVID. So I think it is so exciting that health systems have come together, right? Large systems, to aggregate data, to find those hints within it, and to share it across with each other without, of course, disclosing any personal information from the patient population.
This is another topic that you and I talked about recently with regard to payers who felt a lot of pain in the recent past and had significant amount of costs associated with having, testing in parking lots or setting up temporary hospitals in malls, etc., which were not attributable to a patient and therefore not easily reimbursable. How did you in your organization deal with that?
Yeah, well, most important, right, for Providence was caring for our community. So we set up the tent, the ad hoc tents. We partnered actually with other health systems to set up on-site testing and vaccination sites. So safety first. From a reimbursement perspective, though, wow, you're right. We did lose a lot. Thankfully, with the CARES Act funding and some FEMA funding, there were emergency programs to help hospitals and providers recoup, some of the expenses that were outside of the patient claim, if you will, to be really nimble. And the one thing I'll say about the pandemic is there's this running joke at not-for-profit healthcare, right, that nothing happens quickly, but COVID taught us we could be nimble. We could turn on a dime and get the right systems in place and the right practices in place in order to provide for our communities.
So, John, let me ask you a question. There's a lot of talk about, interoperability and data portability, if you will, where patients should be able to take the data from A to B, one system to another. Are you actually seeing any progress there? And do some of the payers and the providers actually see a value to doing that?
Yeah, I think that the deployment of interoperability standards is very much in its infancy right now, and we're just starting to see some of the potential benefits. We've always known that sharing data between systems would be an important part of a longer term strategy, because we get a better view of our consumer, our member. We can see not only what their health history is, but how they've interacted with hospital systems or what kind of services they've consumed and things. So right now, a lot of the focus in interoperability is around getting the infrastructure right and the security correct. So if I'm going to share data, how do I do it? How do I intake it? What sort of network path does it traverse? And those things will be important for protection of consumer data and to lay the groundwork. But I think we're just really scratching the surface of interoperability. The potential is so great because once you have medical history combined with commercial and claims history, and then you add in things like the social demographics of health of individuals, now you can really use those tools again to try to connect with the right people at the right time, which would be before something turns more serious, right? And so I think we're seeing a lot of people who are focused on getting interoperability protocols correct. And I think what we'll see going forward is the business applications that rely on interoperability to get a better picture of our members and patients.
So, Steve, let me take you. I know you've done a little bit of work in the public policy space and in interacting with some regulators. what kind of regulations would need to change to enable this hyperautomation? So for instance, I keep hearing from people that things like HIPAA, et cetera, are actually, while they were designed to protect privacy, are also getting in the way of interoperability.
Well, that's probably true. But on the other hand, patient safety and security are huge issues, especially with ransomware and all the data that's coming out. One study I showed said that patient health data is worth 8 times as much as as financial data. And you can see that's one of the reasons why I'm sure the big tech companies, Amazon, Google, they're all getting into this space because they want that data. And one of the big things that we have to worry about is also the rural health markets. So the FCC has set up several pilots and given out about $450 million so far to different health systems that are able to go into the rural markets and try and create broadband. The new bipartisan bill that's out there for the infrastructure puts $65 billion out there in order to increase broadband. So that once we start being able to connect everybody in the United States, you can get much greater interoperability. We've had Kimberly and I were discussing this the other day. Health systems, compete with each other, obviously, for patients. And so some of them have been reluctant to share data between the health systems, but are more willing to work between the payer and the health system in order to speed payment. As we get into interoperability and standards that need to be met, people using the FHIR 3 standard, for example, right now, we really need to get a 360 view of the patient and wherever they've been around the country and in their history, because that can make a difference. And when you're able to feed that data into an AI algorithm to assist the physician with their diagnosis, they have a lot more information, and the AI systems can just synthesize so much of this information so quickly that they can help with clinical decision support and make things much more efficient in the future.
So I went through this, I can tell you that the interoperability is something that touches all of us, I'm sure, particularly those of us who relocate. So I relocated from the East Coast to the West Coast about 5 years ago.
Exactly.
I used to be in the UPenn system, now I'm in the UC system.
Right.
But my chart was a godsend. I was able to share so much of my information,
Exactly.
On my iPad directly to my physician here in the UC system. And then eventually they were able to connect the two systems and pull over data. There's a question from the audience that I thought, Kimberly, you might be able to address. There's some question regarding billing from hospitals and billing errors, and question, I think there was even a mention that potentially could be fraud. I'm not going to go there, but I'd like to ask you, what processes you have in place to catch such errors and or minimize them.
Yeah, it is really an antagonizer, right? When you think of medical billing. And I'll give you a good example from a hospital. When you get the bill, you think, okay, my services are going to cost $500. And then lo and behold, you get a separate bill from the lab, and then you get a separate bill from the anesthesiologist who performed your surgery, and a separate bill from the surgeon. It is so complex and confusing. I could see where it almost looks fraudulent because you went in for one service and received 4 separate bills. Another great part of my chart and being part of a large integrated system is we can aggregate those into one piece. I think another great benefit of some of the payer provider relationships is sharing up that data, because you could see a physician who's not in our network, we would not know about it. So it is not defensible on how disjointed it is today, but there are so many efforts in pricing transparency and surprise billing coming out of the federal government to reduce that friction and that uncertainty for the patients.
But do you have any systems or technologies that you're deploying to help sort of catch where they may be double billing by, in error, etc.
Yeah, we definitely have controls in place to eliminate double billing. What I'll say though, from a system perspective, what we are putting in place is a digital payment platform for all of our patients so that they can see all of their bills in a single place. They can communicate with us via text or chat or other means rather than the traditional. You get a piece of mail, right, from us that says this is not a bill, and then you get a piece of mail from us that says this is a bill, and patients wait until their insurance says yes, we paid the bill and this is your balance. Really, just kind of mixing that all together in a digital way so that the patient has a 360 view of what's happening across their continuum of care.
So, John, just like hyperautomation, big data is another term that's always out there. And I know in healthcare, it's truly big data because we're talking about a lot of it coming at hyper velocity from all, sources. How is that being harnessed from your vantage point to improve either patient outcomes or reduce cost or to minimize the, work effort, workload on the medical practitioners?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's such a big area and a big field. When I think back over let's say maybe the last 5 years and talking to a number of clients, there's a recurring theme that because the data is so big maybe in separate platforms or systems, it can sometimes be an overload. So people will have a lot of data, but it is a lot of information. So the key is to produce insights against that data set. And I think the tools are now starting to emerge where you can use artificial intelligence algorithms, or you can apply intelligent machine learning algorithms to sort through the data, massage it, and then organize it in a way that it could be consumed. Now, certainly organizations have been able to use their data effectively over time. I'm not suggesting that it's been historically futile, but I think again, the evolution of these tool sets are now going to provide a different set of capabilities. Now, once you get a hold of that data, I think that you're going to start to really see the linkage between the data and engagement with the people that represent that data. So, the digital front door, if you will, is inherently something that you think, well, if my customer or patient wants to get a hold of me, they'll come to me through a digital front door. That's a one-way communication. It's I need something, can you help me? Where the big data applications are now enabling proactive engagement. So rather than wait for a patient to call, we're seeing that a patient may have symptoms of a stroke or a pre-cardiac event, such as weight gain or blood pressure increases and things. So then that triggers now an engagement that can reach out, ask that person how they're doing, how they're feeling, and then maybe head off some of these procedures in the past. So I think, people have been grappling with this, and now with these tools like interoperability, artificial intelligence algorithms, and then the platforms, from big tech like Microsoft and Google and Salesforce are now giving us an ability to harness that data without having to have a team of data scientists on your staff.
So there's a question from the audience, Steve. I thought I'd pose it to you. It's related to the earlier question that Kimberly had responded to with respect to billing. The question is are you seeing in the industry any coordination between payer and provider to smooth out that billing conundrum that Kim described, so that it appears to be a little bit more rational from the patient's perspective or the customer's perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of work going on between payers and providers. And there's actually a lot of hospital systems that own payers. So, and I see there's a consolidation that seems to be going on in many areas where payers and providers are becoming integrated entities and working together. You can find, once you can be able to start sharing the data from the EMR with the payer, you can get much more proactive treatments, and the goal is really for value-based care. That's where we're moving. Capitation, sharing risk management, keeping the patient population healthier than what we have now. That's the ultimate goal, is longevity. And being able to utilize all the resources we have from the pharmaceutical industry, the finance industry, the payers, all putting it together around the patient. So I think you're seeing much greater integration there between the payers and the providers, especially with some of the cumbersome pre-cert type activities and collecting all the data that's necessary. If part of the digital front door is to be able to reach out to consumers or patients in advance using their cell phones, using their iPads, and gather as much data that used to have to be collected by paper in the physician's office, putting it into the system before the patient ever gets there. Once you have all that, you can then hyperautomate. And once you hyperautomate in between the payers, it really smooths out to become much more a seamless transaction, like the banking system and like some other industries we have. I mean, obviously the ATM, you can go to any bank and access your account. Can we do that in healthcare? Not quite yet, but we should be able to, and we should be able to get estimates of what the cost is, as Kimberly was talking about, from all the bills combined by putting a layer over the EMR with interoperability that ties all this data together for the patient.
Thank you. Kimberly, let me ask you a sort of out-of-the-box question. If you had no budget constraints, what kind of hyperautomation would you be investing in?
Wow, that is out of the box question. As a revenue cycle professional, I always just get the billing questions. It would have to be ways to engage and stay connected with our patients. So, and I think digital front door really enables that for our organizations, right? In sickness and in health, we have channels to communicate. So anything in that regard, I think, is where we would invest our money. And interestingly, Providence has started a company called Tegria, right? It is an end-to-end revenue cycle service provider with the hopes of bringing together large systems and continually funding those technology advancements and being a tech-enabled industry from a revenue cycle perspective. Instead of what Steve alluded to, we are paper-based, and that is so antagonizing to the patient when you ask them for the same information over and over and it's stored somewhere, or you're validating their demographic information when it's, in any other industry, they would just update their profile, in Amazon. So it's just, there's a long way to go in healthcare from a administrative perspective. And I'm so excited to see so many technology companies getting in the game to really driving that forward.
So just speaking a little bit from the life sciences standpoint, because I've had a little bit of visibility in some of the work that's going on there. And since none of you are from the life sciences industry, I didn't pose too many questions in that realm. I just thought I'd add, I'm really encouraged to see some of the work that's being done and technology that's being harnessed between, guided missile technologies, which is actually nanospheres coated with, medication that can then be tracked through MRIs to see if it's actually going to the disease state, what, reaction it's having. Those are all some really cutting edge kind of science that I'm seeing out there. And I think that while the pharma industry has always had the, issue of being viewed as, the high margin business, I think that there is a lot of disruption coming from some of the really, smaller biotech companies that are challenging the old model. And, I see a lot of automation, as Steve had mentioned earlier, using CAD chemistry, doing fast follower, doing scaffold based research that, is extremely encouraging. So I think if I'm not mistaken, I just got a time bell there. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is go around and ask each of you to give us maybe a 2-minute, takeaway from today's discussion. So maybe we can start with you, Kimberly.
Yeah, I would just say the takeaway for me is these are exciting times in healthcare. A lot of investment, rapid technology advancements that have extended beyond just the clinical and into the administrative. And we are all charged, payers and providers finally aligned on, we need to take the administrative costs out of healthcare and make it more affordable. And the tension between payers and providers needs to be alleviated. So I see technology being an enabler for greater partnerships, both with the payers and also amongst providers.
Steve?
Well, I see the future as digital. Obviously, digital transformation is where everybody's going right now. It's so much faster. We're going to get more hospital at home. I think we're going to get much more cloud-based applications as hospitals move from on-prem to third-party public cloud-based cloud-based systems. Much of this will have a 360 view of the patient, including cybersecurity, interoperability, Internet of Medical Things. One of the things we mentioned earlier was the interconnected devices. There's 20 billion devices right now connected to the internet. They expect 200 billion shortly. So that's going to obviously, the cybersecurity issues and access to data is going to be critical. We're going to see much greater use of AI and machine learning in all aspects of healthcare. So everything that can possibly be automated will be automated. And anything that you can apply an algorithm to help with your predictive modeling and ease the stress on some of the providers that's out there right now, especially with the EMRs taking so much time out of the physician's day to automate that. You're going to see that, and you're going to see a lot more risk-based, value-based care monitoring. You'll see a lot more technologies like 3D printing of organs, prosthesis, connections to the brain for prosthesis, robotics, cobots, with cobots that are coming along to help process surgery, lots of continuous process improvement, and the care journey. It's going to, I think, be the focus of healthcare as we go forward.
Thank you, Steve. How about you, John? What's your takeaway from today's conversation?
Well, I like the fact that a lot of the investments and a lot of the accelerated capabilities that have come out of the pandemic and the digital health revolution, if you will, are going to start really paying off for members as it relates to wellness. So I think about the experience of the patient and initiatives like Best Buy Company, who is traditionally thought of as an electronics retailer, now getting into the Medicare space and adopting a set of devices that are more friendly and applicable for senior citizens to use. I think of the scenario such as at Ochsner Health System in New Orleans, where they have a sort of a genius bar that sits right next door to the pharmacy. So if I'm discharged from the hospital and my doctor has prescribed not only a drug for me, but has prescribed an app and some supporting hardware, I can stop in, pick it up, get acclimated to it, and take it home, just like I take home a bottle of pills. And where I think this is really leading is it's going to allow us to help people who have chronic diseases that are complex and costly and get in front of people in a pre-acute stage, as opposed to waiting until symptoms occur that are more concrete.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo almost everything that I just heard from the three of you. And, John, you just stole the line I was going to use, which is that the one good thing that came out of the pandemic is that healthcare, which has always been slow moving, if you will, cautious, and, heavily regulated, obviously, has now realized that digitization, hyperautomation, and, moving more towards better patient care at the end of the day is something it has engendered, if you will.
Yeah.
So to that extent, I think that that's a good thing that came out of it. And I can tell you that I've seen a simple example I can give you, as I mentioned earlier in a conversation I had with Steve and Kimberly, the pharma industry that stayed, completely away from the cloud with all this data privacy and can't go out there, is all of a sudden rushing fully into the cloud. And they have to, because of how distributed all of their systems have become now, and the footprints are becoming completely fragmented. So trying to get everyone to connect to a central within your firewall kind of situation isn't working anymore. So I'm extremely encouraged. I see a lot of progress. Clearly, the healthcare industry is one that will take one step forward and 1.5 steps back once in a while. That does happen, but as long as it's done in the interest of the patient, that's a good thing. So that's been my takeaway from this conversation. Very happy to hear about all the great things that each of you have been doing in your fields, and thank you for joining us for this forum.
Thank you to all of our speakers and our attendees today. We hope you enjoyed the session as much as we did. So a replay of today's session will be available on our website shortly. We will also email it to all attendees. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again at another Avasant Digital Forum. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.